The lobby of the Grand Ridge Hotel gleamed under bright chandeliers, its marble floors polished to perfection. A few guests milled around, some checking in, others dragging their suitcases toward the elevators. Behind the front desk stood Richard Coleman, the hotel manager, a man who prided himself on keeping everything in order. But tonight, his sense of control was about to be tested in a way he never saw coming. When the entrance doors slid open, a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped inside, his posture upright, but his expression tense. He looked around cautiously, scanning the room with sharp, trained eyes. At his side, a golden retriever trotted obediently, wearing a blue vest with bright yellow patches. Service dog, PTSD assistance. The man, Marcus Walker, had spent years serving his country. A decorated veteran, he had seen and endured things most people couldn't imagine. Though he was no longer in combat, the war still lived inside him. Loud noises, sudden movements, even the wrong kind of lighting could trigger memories he wished he could forget. His service dog, Ranger, was more than just a companion. He was a lifeline. Marcus approached the front desk, his fingers tightening slightly around Ranger's leash. "Good evening," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I have a reservation under Walker." Richard barely glanced up from his computer. One moment, he muttered, typing sluggishly. His eyes flickered toward Ranger, and his lips curled into a slight sneer. A dog? Inside his hotel? He straightened, folding his arms. "Sir, we don't allow pets in the hotel." Marcus remained composed. "Ranger isn't a pet. He's a service animal. It's against the law to deny entry." Richard sighed dramatically, rolling his eyes. "Look, I'll make the rules, but we have standards here. And I can't have," he hesitated, lowering his voice just slightly, animals running around, disturbing the guests. A couple standing near the coffee bar turned their heads, sensing the tension. A receptionist at the side desk glanced over, eyes widening slightly. But Marcus? He didn't flinch. He was used to this kind of reaction, but that didn't mean he would tolerate it. "I serve this country," Marcus said, his voice carrying a quiet strength. "This dog is trained to assist me. You don't get to allow or not allow him. That's not how it works." Richard let out a dry chuckle. "Right? And I'm supposed to believe that." He leaned in, lowering his voice again. "You don't look disabled to me." The room fell silent. The air seemed to thicken. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but he forced himself to breathe, to stay grounded. Ranger pressed against his leg, sensing the shift in his energy, his warm presence a reminder that he wasn't alone. Richard smirked, thinking he had won this little power play. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have predicted, was that his words, his smug attitude, and his outright ignorance were about to come back to haunt him in the most unforgettable way. And that's when it all began. Marcus felt the weight of Richard's words settle over him like a heavy blanket. He had heard things like this before, too many times to count. Some people looked at him and assumed that because he wasn't in a wheelchair, because he didn't have visible scars, that he wasn't struggling. They didn't see the long nights spent battling memories that wouldn't fade, the way sudden noises made his heart race, or how Ranger's steady presence was the only thing that kept him from drowning in it all. He exhaled slowly, gripping Ranger's leash tighter. He knew this situation could escalate if he let his emotions take over, but he had fought for too long, sacrificed too much, to be dismissed like this. "You don't get to decide what disability looks like," Marcus said, his voice steady but firm. Richard scoffed, shaking his head. "Listen, buddy, I run this hotel, and I have to think about the comfort of all my guests. People don't want to see a big dog walking around the lobby, okay? Some of them might be allergic. Some of them might be scared. And, frankly, I just don't think it's professional." Marcus clenched his jaw. He could feel the stares of other guests lingering on him, some whispering to each other, while others simply watched in silence. He knew some of them agreed with Richard, but he also noticed a few people shifting uncomfortably, sensing the injustice of the situation. Ranger nudged Marcus's leg gently, his brown eyes looking up at him, reminding him to stay calm. The dog was trained for this, to sense when Marcus was getting overwhelmed and ground him in the present. Taking another breath, Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. He placed it on the counter and slid it toward Richard. This is a federal law. Service dogs are allowed in public spaces, including hotels. You cannot discriminate against me because of my disability. Richard barely glanced at the card before pushing it back. I don't need to read it. I know the rules. He then forced a smile, his tone suddenly dripping with fake politeness. Look, sir, if you want to stay here, you're welcome to book a room. But the dog? Not happening. A few guests in the lobby gasped quietly. One woman shook her head in disbelief. The receptionist at the side desk looked away, as if pretending not to hear. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. He had been through too much to be treated like this. He could feel the frustration rising, but he knew that losing his temper wouldn't help. He had learned over the years that some battles had to be fought with patience, not just force. A deep voice cut through the silence. Excuse me, but that's not how the law works. Marcus turned to see a man in his late 50s standing nearby, his sharp blue eyes fixed on Richard. He wore a well-tailored suit and carried himself with an air of authority. There was something familiar about him, though Marcus couldn't place it. Richard narrowed his eyes. And who exactly are you? The man pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open, revealing a gold badge. Daniel Carter, civil rights attorney. A ripple of murmurs spread through the lobby. Richard's expression faltered for just a moment before he forced a laugh. Oh, come on. You expect me to believe that? Daniel didn't flinch. Believe what you want. But if you don't let this man check in with his service dog, I'll be filing a formal complaint with the Department of Justice. And trust me, that's not a fight you want. Marcus watched as Richard's face lost a bit of its color. He clearly hadn't expected anyone to step in. Richard glanced around, as if hoping someone would back him up, but the energy in the room had shifted. The guests who had previously stayed silent were now looking at him with scrutiny, some whispering amongst themselves. Even the receptionist, who had been avoiding eye contact, was now watching with interest. For a long moment, Richard said nothing. His fingers drummed against the desk, his jaw tight. Finally, he let out a sharp breath. Fine, he muttered. Whatever. Just keep that thing out of the dining areas. Marcus didn't move. He wasn't done. I want a written apology, he said, his voice calm but unwavering. For your discrimination. Richard's head snapped up. Are you kidding me? Daniel stepped closer. I suggest you do it, or I'll make sure this hotel is investigated for violating federal law. The tension in the air was so thick it felt suffocating. Richard's face was red now, anger and humiliation flashing his eyes. He looked at Marcus, then at the growing crowd of onlookers. He seemed to realize he had already lost. Grabbing a piece of hotel stationery, he scribbled something quickly, his movements sharp and jerky. Then, he shoved the paper across the desk. There. Happy. Marcus picked it up, scanning the words. It wasn't much, just a few short lines, but it was enough. He folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. Without another word, he turned to Daniel and nodded. Thank you. Daniel smiled slightly. People like him count on no one standing up. I wasn't going to let that happen. Marcus nodded again before reaching down to pat Ranger's head. The dog looked up at him, tail wagging slightly, sensing that the worst of the moment had passed. As he grabbed his room key and turned toward the elevators, he could feel Richard's glare burning into his back. But Marcus didn't care, because deep down, he knew something Richard hadn't realized yet. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Marcus walked toward the elevators, his grip on Ranger's leash firm but relaxed. His heart was still pounding, not from fear, but from the familiar frustration of having to fight for something that should never have been a fight in the first place. He had faced worse than an arrogant hotel manager. Much worse, but that didn't make moments like this any easier. The door slid open, and he stepped inside, pressing the button for his floor. As they ascended, he reached into his pocket, pulling out the crumpled apology note Richard had scrawled in anger. He stared at the words, his jaw tightening. It wasn't genuine. It wasn't remorse. It was just a way for Richard to get rid of him, to make the problem go away. Ranger shifted beside him, sensing his unease. The dog pressed against Marcus's leg, offering silent reassurance. Marcus let out a slow breath, then tucked the note away. This wasn't over. Not yet. When the elevator doors opened, he stepped out into the quiet hallway. His room was at the far end, away from the bustling lobby. That was fine with him. He preferred it that way. Less noise, fewer people. As he slid the keycard into the door, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about this night wasn't finished. Inside, the room was neat and modern, the bed perfectly made, the air crisp with the faint scent of fresh linen. Marcus set his duffel bag down by the dresser and let Ranger off his leash. The golden retriever immediately padded over to the corner of the room, circling once before lying down, his tail thumping lightly against the carpet. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his temples. He had planned this trip as a quiet getaway, a chance to breathe, to have a moment of peace. Instead, it had turned into another battle, another reminder that the world wasn't always willing to accommodate people like him. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He frowned, glancing at the clock. It was late, too late for housekeeping. Rising to his feet, he moved toward the door and peered through the peephole. A woman stood outside, shifting nervously. She was young, probably in her mid-20s, wearing a hotel uniform. Her dark hair was pulled back into a ponytail, and she held a small notepad in her hands. Curious, Marcus opened the door slightly. "Can I help you?" She hesitated before speaking. I just wanted to say I saw what happened downstairs." Her voice was quiet, cautious. "And I don't think it was right." Marcus studied her for a moment. She looked nervous, like she wasn't sure she should even be here. He opened the door a little wider. "What's your name?" "Sarah." She glanced over her shoulder, as if making sure no one was watching. "I work the front desk." Marcus nodded. "I remember seeing you." She shifted on her feet. "Look, I probably shouldn't be up here, but Richard does this a lot. He picks people he thinks won't fight back. People he thinks he can get away with mistreating." Marcus folded his arms. "And the hotel just lets him." She looked away. "He's been here for years. The owner trusts him. Complaints don't really go anywhere." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He had a feeling Richard had done this before, but hearing it confirmed made his frustration grow. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah hesitated again before meeting his gaze. "Because you didn't back down, and because I think maybe this time something could change." Marcus studied her for a moment, sensing the sincerity in her voice. She wasn't just here to gossip. She wanted something to be different. He nodded. "Thank you for telling me." She exhaled, looking relieved. "Just be careful. Richard doesn't like being embarrassed. And after what happened downstairs, I don't think he's going to just let it go." Marcus's muscles tensed slightly. He had spent years in the military learning how to read people, how to sense when trouble was brewing. And right now, Sarah's words felt more like a warning than just friendly advice. After she left, he closed the door and locked it. Ranger lifted his head, ears twitching. Marcus sat back down, running a hand over his face. This was supposed to be a simple trip, just a few nights to clear his mind. But now, it felt like something bigger was unfolding. And deep down, he knew one thing for sure. Richard Coleman wasn't finished with him yet. Marcus lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the faint hum of the air conditioner the only sound in the room. Ranger lay curled up on the floor beside him, his rhythmic breathing steady, comforting. But Marcus couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying the events from earlier. The smug look on Richard's face, the way he had dismissed him like he didn't matter. He had faced worse men before, men who had power and weren't afraid to abuse it. And men like Richard, they didn't just let things go. Marcus turned onto his side, glancing at the door. Sarah's words lingered in his mind. Be careful. What had she meant by that? Was Richard the type to retaliate? The thought unsettled him, but not because he was afraid, because he knew exactly how men like that operated. A sudden noise broke through the silence. A faint click, followed by the sound of something shifting outside his door. Ranger's ears perked up instantly, his head lifting. He let out a low, quiet growl, not aggressive but alert. Marcus sat up, his senses sharpening. He didn't move right away. Instead, he listened. The sound came again, a subtle scraping against the door, like someone testing the lock. Marcus slipped out of bed, moving silently to the door. He glanced through the peephole, but whoever was out there had positioned themselves just out of sight. His gut tightened. He reached for the door handle, but didn't open it. Instead, he spoke, his voice steady but firm. "I don't know who you are, but you've got about 3 seconds to walk away before I call security." Silence. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the shadow in the hallway shifted. Footsteps retreated, soft but hurried, disappearing down the hall. Marcus waited a few seconds before unlocking the door and pulling it open just enough to see. The hallway was empty. His eyes swept over the carpet, catching a small piece of folded paper lying just outside his door. He bent down, picked it up, and unfolded it. Inside, written in rushed, almost frantic handwriting, were 4 words. "Watch your back. Tonight." Marcus felt his heartbeat quicken. The paper was still warm, as if someone had just written it. His first instinct was that it was from Sarah, but why would she warn him this way? And if it wasn't her, then who? He stepped fully into the hallway, scanning both directions. Nothing. No movement. Just the eerie quiet of the late-night hotel corridors. He closed the door and locked it again, bolting it this time. Ranger was on his feet now, standing close, sensing the shift in Marcus's energy. Marcus placed a hand on the dog's head, grounding himself. Whoever had been outside his door wasn't just trying to intimidate him. They wanted him to know he wasn't welcome here. And Marcus had a feeling Richard was behind it. His mind raced through possibilities. If Richard was willing to be this bold, what else was he capable of? Would he try to have Marcus thrown out? Try to sabotage him in some other way? Or worse, was there something even bigger going on at this hotel that Marcus had stumbled into without realizing it? One thing was certain. This wasn't just about a service dog anymore. Marcus glanced at the clock. It was past midnight, but his adrenaline was too high for sleep now. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to wait for them to come to him. Quietly, he grabbed his phone and slid it into his pocket. Then he knelt beside Ranger, rubbing the dog's fur lightly. "Come on, buddy," he whispered. "Let's see what we can find." He moved toward the door, unlocked it, and stepped into the hallway, his senses on high alert. He had a feeling something was coming, and this time he was ready for it. Marcus moved down the dimly lit hallway, his footsteps light against the carpet. Ranger stayed close to his side, his ears alert. The silence of the hotel felt unnatural now, like something unseen was lurking just beyond his reach. His instincts told him this wasn't paranoia. Someone was watching him. The note, the sounds outside his door, the way Richard had looked at him earlier, it all pointed to something bigger than just a hotel manager with a bad attitude. He reached the end of the corridor and paused near the stairwell. If someone was following him, the last thing he wanted was to be trapped in an elevator. He pushed open the heavy door and slipped inside, his eyes scanning the dimly lit stairwell. It was empty, descending slowly. He kept his hand close to his pocket, where his phone was. He didn't know what he was expecting to find, but he had learned long ago to trust his gut. Something about this place felt wrong. As he reached the second floor, he heard it. Whispers. Low, hurried voices coming from just beyond the door leading to the hallway. Marcus stopped, pressing his back against the wall, listening. "I told you, this wasn't supposed to be a problem," a man's voice muttered. "Yeah? Well, it is now," another replied. "He's not just some random guest. You saw what happened earlier. He's not letting this go." Marcus narrowed his eyes. The voices were familiar, but the muffled door made it hard to place them. He edged closer, careful not to make a sound. "We should have handled this before it got out of hand." There was a long pause before the first man spoke again, lower this time, more urgent. "Just do what you need to do, but don't screw it up." Marcus's pulse quickened. Then, footsteps, coming his way. He moved fast, slipping down another flight of stairs, pressing himself against the shadows of a landing as the door above creaked open. A figure stepped into the stairwell, but in the dim light, Marcus could only make out the outline of a man in dark clothing. The man paused for a moment, as if scanning the space, then turned and continued downward, straight toward him. Marcus gripped Ranger's leash, motioning for the dog to stay quiet. His mind was racing. He didn't know exactly what was going on, but he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about a hotel policy anymore. The man was getting closer. Marcus tensed, preparing himself for whatever was coming next. And then, the lights flickered. For a brief second, The entire stairwell was swallowed in darkness. And in that moment, Marcus heard something that made his blood run cold. A door opening above him. More than one set of footsteps now. He wasn't dealing with just one person. There were two, and they were closing in. Marcus's heartbeat pounded in his ears as the footsteps closed in. The stairwell was too narrow to maneuver easily, and with Ranger by his side, running wasn't an option. His military instincts kicked in. He needed to think fast. The lights flickered again, and for a brief second, the dim glow of the emergency exit sign cast just enough light for him to see the figures above him. Two men, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other shorter, moving with nervous energy. Neither of them looked like hotel staff. Marcus took a slow, quiet breath and stepped further into the shadows. Ranger stayed perfectly still, trained to move on command. The taller man spoke first, his voice low. "You sure he's still down here?" "He didn't take the elevator," the shorter one replied. "That means he's somewhere in the stairs." Marcus clenched his jaw. They were looking for him. That confirmed it. This wasn't random. This was planned. He shifted slightly, feeling for the railing behind him. If he could get to the next landing without being seen, he could— A sudden creak. Ranger's paw against the step. Both men snapped their heads in his direction. "There!" Marcus moved fast. In one swift motion, he pushed open the door to the second floor and slipped into the hallway, Ranger right beside him. He sprinted toward the nearest corner, his eyes scanning for an exit. The hotel's layout flashed in his mind. There was a service corridor somewhere down this hall. Behind him, the stairwell door burst open. Heavy footsteps thundered after him. Marcus pushed forward, reaching the end of the hall. The door to the service corridor was slightly ajar, his one chance. He shoved it open and slipped inside, pressing himself against the wall as Ranger followed. The footsteps grew louder, then suddenly stopped. Where'd he go? Marcus stayed silent, his breathing controlled. The men lingered for a few seconds, their shadows stretching across the dim hallway. Then, one of them cursed under his breath. "Forget it. He's not worth it. Let's go." Their footsteps retreated, heading back toward the stairs. Marcus didn't move until the sound faded completely. Then, slowly he exhaled. He knelt next to Ranger, scratching behind his ears. "Good boy." The dog wagged his tail lightly, still alert. His mind raced. Someone had sent those men after him, and he had a strong feeling he knew exactly who it was. Richard. This wasn't just about the service dog. This was about control. Richard thought he could intimidate Marcus into leaving, but he had underestimated the kind of man he was dealing with. Marcus wasn't going anywhere. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. An old friend, someone who still had connections in law enforcement. He pressed the call button. When a voice on the other end answered, Marcus didn't waste time. "I need you to run a name for me." There was a brief pause. "Then who?" Marcus's eyes hardened as he glanced down the hallway, toward where the two men had disappeared. Richard Coleman. The silence on the other end told him everything. Then, finally, "You're not the first person to ask about him." Marcus tightened his grip on his phone, his pulse steady but his mind racing. He had expected Richard's name to raise some red flags, but the silence on the other end of the line told him this ran deeper than just a hotel manager with a bad attitude. Finally, his contact sighed. "Marcus, listen to me. Richard Coleman's got a record of complaints, but nothing ever sticks. He's connected to the hotel's owner, some kind of old family friend. There have been reports of shady activity, but every time someone pushes back, the complaints disappear. The guy knows how to cover his tracks." Marcus glanced down the hallway, making sure no one was around. "Well, he made a mistake this time," he said calmly. "He tried to have me run out of here." "Yeah, and if he sees you as a real problem, he won't stop at that," his contact warned. "I tell you to leave, but I know you won't." Marcus smirked slightly. His friend knew him well. Not a chance. A pause. "Then, I'll see what I can find." But Marcus, be careful. He ended the call and slipped his phone back into his pocket, exhaling slowly. The pieces were coming together now. Richard wasn't just a power-hungry manager. He was used to getting away with things, covering his tracks, and silencing people who got in his way. But Marcus wasn't just anyone. He took one last look down the hallway before making his way back to his room. Ranger walked beside him, his tail flicking but his posture alert. Marcus didn't relax until he was inside, door bolted shut. He sat on the bed, running a hand over his face. He had come here for a quiet trip, a moment to clear his head, but instead, he had walked straight into something bigger than he'd expected. He could leave, go home, and let someone else deal with it. But that wasn't who he was. The next morning, Marcus was up early. He took Ranger for a walk outside, needing fresh air to think. The hotel grounds were quiet, only a few employees moving about. As he walked back toward the entrance, he spotted Sarah behind the front desk. She caught his eye and hesitated before gesturing subtly for him to come over. Marcus approached, keeping his tone casual. "Morning." Sarah's expression was tight. "You okay?" she asked, voice low. "Yeah," he said, "but I think you already know Richard sent people after me last night." She swallowed hard. "I tried to warn you." "I know," he said, keeping his voice steady. "And I appreciate it." He studied her for a moment. "Sarah, why are you still working here? You're smart. You know what kind of place this is." Her face twisted with something like regret. "Because I need the job," she admitted. "And because, before last night, I didn't think anyone would ever do anything about it." She glanced around nervously. "But you're not like the others, are you? You're not just going to let this go." Marcus gave a small smile. "No, I'm not." Sarah hesitated before sliding a small notepad across the counter. "I don't have proof of anything, but I've kept notes. Weird things I've seen. Things Richard has done." Her voice lowered. "If you can do something with this, maybe things can finally change." Marcus took the notepad and slipped it into his jacket. "You just made sure they will." Sarah nodded, relief flickering across her face. "Be careful." Marcus gave her a reassuring look before turning and walking back toward his room. He had everything he needed now. A few hours later, Marcus checked out of the hotel, keeping his movements casual. He loaded his bag into his truck, giving Ranger a scratch behind the ears before climbing in. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he spotted Richard standing near the entrance, watching him with narrowed eyes. Marcus met his gaze in the rearview mirror and smiled. 2 days later, news broke that the hotel was under investigation. Complaints that had once been buried were being reopened. Employees were speaking out. Richard Coleman was put on immediate suspension, and his connection to the hotel's owner was now under scrutiny. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, Ranger curled up beside him, as he watched the story unfold on his phone. He took a sip of his coffee, feeling a quiet satisfaction settle over him. He hadn't just stood up for himself. He had stood up for the people who couldn't. And now, change was finally happening. Ranger lifted his head, tail wagging slightly. Marcus smiled down at him. "Good work, buddy." And with that, he set his phone aside, knowing that some battles were worth fighting, no matter where they found you.